Most common theme yesterday was.
So do I just? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. Okay. Welcome to the Cambridge County Council Constitution. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge County Council's Constitution and Ethics Committee. The County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings. So please feel free to take pictures, use social media during the meeting. Can I ask so that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place? Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and that a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the County Council's website. There's no fire alarm test scheduled for today. If the alarm sounds at any other point, I will adjourn the meeting and we will make our way downstairs out of the main entrance and turn left. The muster point is at the far end of the building. Can I ask for nominations for the role of Vice Chair of the committee, please? Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to nominate Sebastian Kindersley.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, I'd like to second that. Thank you.
So any other nominations? No. There seems to be a general consensus in support of Councillor Kingsley. If anyone disagrees with this nomination, please use the raising hand function now. Right. I see no objections, so Councillor Kingsley is elected as Vice Chair for the municipal year. I'll now go on to item 2, is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. Would the Democratic Service Assistant report any apologies for absence?
We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Reynolds, and Councillor Goldsack is joining us instead. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to declare any disclosable perjury interest or non-statutory disclosable interest?
Nope.
Nope. We've been asked to approve the minutes of the Constitution and Ethics Committee meeting on the 2nd of May 23 as an accurate record. If any member disagrees, does not agree, would you raise your hand now? Nope. I see no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as an accurate record, so we will take that as a carried unanimously. Oh, Councillor Maguire.
Chair, and Chair, I have no objections to the minutes at all, but I did notice when I looked at those who were present, and I thought, oh, where was I? And I realised I was on holiday. I did contact my group looking for a sub, but I obviously didn't follow it up by making sure that Democratic Services and Chairman were aware. So my apologies to the committee for not having given my apologies.
Okay, thank you very much for that. On the basis that the committee members happy to approve the minutes as written, subject to that change, councillor Maguire, and again, I would ask anyone who has objections to raise their hands now. No? On that basis, the recommendations to approve the minutes is carried. Item 4 is a report on recommendations for governance review. The Director, Legal and Governance will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. Members will probably be familiar with the context of this, but just for clarity, I'll go through some of the initial points. The governance review, which we're talking about today, was undertaken in response to a recommendation from the Corporate Peer Challenge review process led by the LGA. That's a sectoral improvement process which goes into councils and identifies areas which are good practice and also areas for review. And in the review back in 2021, the governance and committee system of the council was identified as an area for review. Following that, the council commissioned the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, which are a social enterprise, to undertake a review. They're fairly well known in the sector. They lead on particularly scrutiny matters at local authorities, and this is the outcome of the review. As we move into 2023, members may be aware that earlier this week, the Thurrock, late last week, the Thurrock report, Best Value report, was published. And for members on the Standards Committee, I think it's a really good read. But I think that one of my initial reflections is that actually governance is very, very important, and how that mitigates against the risk of failure of authorities. So the work that we've done here around the governance review is really timely, actually, and it's definitely a lesson in authorities not becoming complacent about their governance arrangements, how it's something that you need to work on pretty much all of the time, whether that's in processes, procedures, or the culture that surrounds that. So in essence, the CFGS came in, they interviewed a number of people, members and officers in relation to the governance framework. They did quite a lot of observation, and they've produced a report. Overall, the report was positive. It made some very positive comments about member-officer relationships having improved. It talked about the professionalism that was in those relationships, but there were a number of other areas where it thought our processes, our procedures, the way that we managed stuff could be done better and differently. And it's made some recommendations around that. So whilst there are some great things in the report, and I think that Cambridgeshire needs to note that, there were some areas where the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny felt that we could improve. Some of that related to decision-making being top-heavy, particularly within a committee system. That's quite unusual because you have more decision-making opportunities because you have so many service committees, which isn't the same within a cabinet system, but they still felt that decision-making was a bit top-heavy in that regard. They felt that the report writing quality was variable, and that I think that certainly in my time here as your monitoring officer, that's something that I've noticed as well. They thought that briefing arrangements and the use of spokes meetings could be handled differently. So I think that the message from that was very much that we're not getting enough briefing into the members across the piece. And I think they felt that could be improved. And I think that also relates back to agendas being top heavy. What they saw was a lot of information for information items. So we were sending stuff to committee that didn't require a member approval, and it was clogging up agendas. And it meant that actually some of the stuff that you really needed to focus on around decision making wasn't adequately being focused on. They've made a number of recommendations in relation to areas which they felt would be helpful for us to look at. I don't think there's anything in there which is particularly controversial. what you want in these reports are things which are improvements on practice rather than a big bang approach. If we were seeing lots of stuff in the recommendations which moved us from very far from where we wanted to be, then there's obviously something fundamentally wrong, which isn't the case here. The first recommendation recommended officer and member training, and really sort of trying to excuse me, I've lost my words there, trying to reinforce member and officer roles. So what we would normally see with member officer relationships, officers do the operational in terms of delivering the business, and members do the policy setting, the strategic direction setting. So I think that they felt there was a bit of an overlap in those areas sometimes, and that can be an area of key governance failure. I think they also felt that officers could do with some political awareness training. Sometimes that isn't evident in the way of when we handle business through committee, and report writing is an area which the officer side is working on and addressing, because that certainly needs to be improved. The member training was about some of those same issues, but actually it picked up some of the scrutiny skills that we need to develop. So one of the observations within the report was that because the agendas are so packed, there's not a lot of time for members to review and scrutinise their own progress on issues, or the authority's own progress on issues. So I think the training there is designed around things like interrogating data and evidence, understanding things like corporate parenting, questioning skills is a really good training session that a number of my previous members have been on and very much enjoyed, and that's really helpful. There was also the review of the member officer protocol in that, and also getting a report writing guide in for officers, which will help. Recommendation 2 was really refocusing some of the meetings that we have to make sure that briefing is being done in the right place, so that members get access to the information that they need. And I think that in terms of that, the more information we can give, the more targeted information we can give members outside meetings that enables them to participate effectively within meetings, then that's a good thing. It was noted that there were over 40 member working groups at the authority. Obviously, that has quite an impact in terms of how we run our business. And they suggested that those be rationalised alongside the member briefing sessions and formats that we use, because a lot of that work could be moved into briefing. They tried to create, under recommendation 4, some more capacity within the meeting cycle at the moment. So using remote meeting technology where, for example, with scrutiny functions, members don't need to be in the room to make a formal decision, proactive use of reserve meetings, and again, coming back to that dissemination of information with members. Recommendation 5 was really around capacity again, to remove some of the responsibilities around asset and procurement from strategy, resources and performance into a separate committee that would be able to scrutinise those proposals in public and give them the attention that they deserve. That I think they simply felt there was too much going on in strategy and resources at the current time. Communities, or the COSMIC, had a little bit of fiddling around the edges, but nothing substantial. The key strategic partnerships would be moved to strategy and resources to give that overall oversight of the council business. And recommendation 7 was really, again, around the edges of adults and health. There was consideration within the paper of creating a separate health scrutiny committee, but certainly at this stage, CFGS felt that it was worth trying something different to see if that worked first. So overall, members, I think the general direction of travel was positive in relation to the report received. The recommendations from the report were fairly standard, and you will see from the paper in front of you, the recommendations on the report itself are fairly straightforward. They are intended to give us a bit of leeway in how we implement the recommendations, subject to consultation engagement with members. But members at this stage are asked to note and comment on the review of the council's committee system, recommend the proposed changes to the constitution, which are effectively the changes to the terms of reference of the Strategy and Resources Committee and the establishment of the Assets Procurement Committee, and delegate authority to me in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair to make those draft amendments to the constitution to be presented to full council.
Thank you for that. Councillor Mr. Moore.
Chief Executive.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've just been promoted. I just wanted to add 3 points really before clearly members will want to discuss this report in addition to the comments from the Service Director, Legal and Governance. First of all, I think it's important we reflect that this report represents a snapshot in time. So this is something that was developed and the diagnostic was undertaken some time ago. So things will have moved on even considerably further than when the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny first undertook their initial findings and exercise of consulting members through survey and interview process. However, I also wanted to reflect that it's an important opportunity for us to strengthen our corporate governance arrangements as a council. I think reflecting on some of the points that Emma has made, we would all recognise that governance and democratic leadership of the County Council is absolutely critical. The report outlines, in my view, a blend of both strategic and some very operational findings, actually, some of which can be taken forward by officers. But I think the key point I wanted to make is ultimately it is for members to decide what you wish to do with the contents of this report. I think that's critical. And obviously, this is entirely within your ownership today as committee. Aligned to that, I did want to make a comment on the proposed new Assets and Procurement Committee, which is referenced in the findings from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. I actually welcome that as a finding. I think an enhanced focus by a Service and Policy Committee on our assets, our estate, our land ownership, and particularly enhancing the scrutiny and attention we pay to procurement, contract management and commissioning will stand the authority in good stead. That's not something we've actually done before, and I'm very clear that this is not the same as any former committee that this council may have had. This committee would not have a role, for example, around matters in relation to investment. I think, as Emma has rightly said in her introduction, if this committee were approved ultimately by council, it would operate in the open and receive these reports in a transparent way, as you would normally expect, unless good commercial sensitivity or other grounds existed for those matters to be exempt. Related to that, I just wanted to reflect on the fact that actually this council has been committed for some time to transparency and openness in decision making. And Emma mentioned one council. If I can just mention several more: Thurrock, Woking, Slough, Croydon. We don't want to be in any of those spaces. So transparency of decision making, scrutiny of decision making and rigour are all important. And I think in reality, this report from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny enables us to reflect on some of those points. And that reflection is clearly important, both politically and managerially. And that probably, Chair, leads me on to my last point. Whilst this originates and emanates from our corporate peer challenge in 2021, clearly as an organisation, we are committed to being both a learning organisation and one that seeks to continuously improve. That's what this report provides us the opportunity to consider, and members the opportunity to determine what they want to take forward. I would also just say that unlike some of our closest neighbours, I'm pleased we participated in the Local Government Association's peer challenge process. I'm mindful that some of our very near geographic neighbours have not done so for some considerable time. So I think taking the opportunity that afforded us in 2021, learning from the recommendations and reflecting further on the issues presented today is helpful for the County Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stephen, and I apologise. Okay, members, we will now move to the debate. Councillor Godse.
Okay, Councillor Goldsack. Right, thank you. Since becoming the opposition for the administration, our group members have repeatedly raised concerns about the committee setup and its workings, included but not limited to the following. Meetings are infrequent and therefore they take too long. Meetings are providing officer-led papers for which members' knowledge is often lacking and sometimes non-existent. Cosmic has delivered little in 2 years other than a jazzy committee name. In many committees, the style and length of meetings close down the opportunity for proper scrutiny, and outcomes are often decided behind closed doors. Members need better education on areas of focus for committees. A return to Friday morning seminars would help. Adults and health simply don't sit well together, and we advocate separation. Debate is stifled often by chairs' actions on committees. The Farms Estate has no natural home and is being largely ignored by members and other areas. Under the previous administration, property, farms and more and investment sat under a C&I committee, a committee that raised in excess of £40 million for frontline services from the investments and decisions made therein. I'm not sure how we would know how such things are now performing under the current committee structure. More examples are made. In almost all cases, the independent report has vindicated our views and raised issues and highlighted those listed. We would like to say that we are unsure of the involvement of any of our group other than our leader in terms of alleged interviews for the report, but we do recognise that the survey was used. We cannot agree as it stands, as it's stated, that Adults and Health team is making significant improvement, which would not have been the feedback from our group members. The last meeting went far smoother than normal, but it may be because the chair was absent and it was deputised by an able vice chair. At the next meeting, we understand that late morning, often squeezed agenda items at normal meetings are being brought earlier in the agenda so that they can get a good hearing. We feel that the report started to determine the possibility of splitting these two areas into separate committees, but pulled back based on uneven opinions that things on the overall committees were improving. In truth, we feel they are not. Health remains an under-focused area due in part to the committee structure and times of meetings, and we conclude that this report should not have stopped at the probable biased feedback from members of the administration compared from that of all members. Note should be also taken of the other reporting matters, including the quality of reports for the member involvement, as mentioned. Give me a second. Having stated all this, our group supports the report recommendations, and in the interest of working together for the better good of the people of our county, we support all recommendations. We hope the redirection of S&R will see an elevation of output from this group, and that the largest land estate of its kind in the UK will now receive the focus it deserves, rather than becoming an afterthought. We look forward to a defined and articulate forward agenda from Focus Communities Group, as opposed to the roundtable talk shop we've currently seen. We further conclude that whilst we would have liked to have separated health from adults to truly focus on rising health issues, our residents perhaps, I apologise, I'll read that bit again. We further conclude that whilst we would have liked to have separated health from adults to truly focus on the rising health issues of our residents, perhaps some of the other changes and feedback will finally engender the better outcomes in this area than we've got from one super committee. So thank you for the report. I personally will be reporting it. I'm sure my colleagues will. And the feedback from our group is that we're very supportive of its outcome.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dupre?
Thank you. I'm actually going to take a very different view. Different, obviously, in specifics. There is a kind of a lazy trope that says that if something annoys both sides of a political divide, it's doing something right. Sometimes it's just because it's really bad. And I have to say this is a disappointingly poor report. I think the peer challenge was a good thing to do, and I was very impressed to see how that turned out and the things that it gave this authority. I thought the terms of reference of the report of the project for CFGS were about right, but the report itself contains unevidenced assertions, factual inaccuracies, internal contradictions. It sets unnecessarily prescriptive requirements in some trivial matters, while having nothing useful to say to guide members in grappling with some really important ones. However, annoyed as I am by the poor quality of the report itself, although I do agree with some of the recommendations in it and some of the observations are absolutely right, what really matters are the recommendations. And looking through those recommendations, some of them, as I've said, are positive and are desirable. I've serious reservations about others, and I would have welcomed the opportunity for members to have workshopped what those changes meant and what they might look like in practice. Instead, we're having this presented as a take it or leave it approach here, and being told we just bounce it to full council and bounce it onwards. It's not clear to me that there is a shared understanding, for example, of which working groups should be axed. And I'm slightly surprised with the sections about working groups, because on the one hand, the report argues that there are too many of them and that they've got to be axed. And I agree. I got a list. Michelle kindly provided me with a list, and I looked at that and I thought, blimey. On the other hand, there are some working groups that do a good job, and there is a call in the report for policy and whatever they would call groups to work behind the scenes. Well, that's what a lot of those working groups do. And I thought they did them very well. And they're looking at finance, they're looking at risks, they're looking at the kind of things that that CFGS say they should be looking at. But I have a terrible, terrible sense of foreboding that the ones that I think are working well are going to be the ones that are going to be axed, and the ones that I would be quite happy to see the back of are the ones that are going to remain. And we haven't had a discussion about that at all. I'm worried that a new strategy and resources committee that also encompasses performance management will function. I'm worried how it'll function without being completely overloaded, and how some decisions will avoid falling into the gaps between committees and be sent to a new committee that is to a committee that's ill prepared to see them in the round. I'm worried that there will be items of business that will fall between environment and green investment, strategy, resources and performance and assets and procurement, and be dealt with by a committee that can't see those things in the round at all. I'm also a bit perplexed by what happens to equality, diversity and inclusion. That was one of the main items that was listed in the brief to CFGS. It seems to have been evicted from COSMIC and not given another home to go to. And I don't understand that at all. It's not made clear anywhere in the report where the council considers equality, diversity and inclusion and embeds that in its work. I'm also very concerned at the proposal to remove engagement between committee chairs and vice chairs and senior officers, other than meeting to arrange the furniture and decide in which order items appear on the agenda papers. That seems to me utterly extraordinary. And I'm also surprised that we're being asked for the Adults and Health Committee to relinquish responsibility for social care and public health, with no space to consider properly what that might mean in practice for local communities. I think there's some very disappointing missed opportunities here as well. For example, I agree that it's really important to consider how members review organisational performance, because this clearly doesn't work under the present arrangements, partly because we get officers presenting performance reports to the brief that they're given and with the role that they're given, but they're not the people who are responsible for the performance being reported on, many of whom often aren't in the room to be able to answer questions. And I'm fed up, frankly, as chair of a committee, having a performance report where members have questions about performance and the only response given is, I'll send members an email about that, because that's all that can be given, because the people responsible for answering to us about those issues aren't actually in the room to answer those questions. And so that doesn't work at present. And I'm really happy to have a review that looks at that. But the trouble is that this report and the recommendations offer nothing helpful or practical to guide us about how we could do that better. It just says you've got to do it better. It says we're going to add it to a new committee to make you do it better, and doesn't actually give us any guidance as to how we can really do that job well. And yet it overly fixates very prescriptively on things like exactly how many committee meetings each committee should have each year. I've got no issue in turning then away from the independent review by CFGS, which, as I say, was a very poor report in my view and a real missed opportunity, to come to the recommendations in the officer paper. I've got no issue with noting and commenting on the officer recommendations. That's fine. That's what we're here to do, and that's what we've done. In my case, fairly bluntly. I'm concerned about recommending to full council changes that are based on a flawed report and haven't been properly considered or worked through. I would have liked an opportunity for members to sit down with at least some of these recommendations in a considered workshop kind of way and had some thoughts about, well, what does that look in practice? What does that mean? How do we make that work? What will the effect of that be? Is that really the case that this is what we do at the moment and need to change? I would love to know which of the reports that have come to my committee should never have come to my committee. I would have loved to sit down in a considered way, gone back through the last year's agendas and gone, okay, so what did we get wrong here? What were the things that we were asked to decide that we shouldn't have been asked to decide? Which of my meetings, our meetings, were too long? My longest meeting of EGI was 3 hours, 25 minutes. The shortest one was 1 hour, 45 minutes. Was the longest one too long? Was the shortest one too short? Were they about the right size? I don't know. But there seems to be a fixation in here that there is an optimum length of time for a meeting and that we somehow didn't fit. I agree that's true about adults and health. I think that's a special case. And that is actually the only committee that has met 4 times in the previous year rather than more frequently than that. So if this committee decides today to recommend these changes, I really hope that between now and full council, we will have the opportunity to seek clarity about the elements in this that are poorly explained and poorly justified, and to receive assurances about the further work that I think needs to be done to address the deficits in the CFGS report and to clarify and work through its recommendations. I'm really unhappy with the idea of just receiving such a misinformed report en bloc and then just passing it on en bloc to full council. It's disappointing that we haven't really had a more considered opportunity before being asked to just go, this is an independent report, we must agree with it.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other officers, any officers want to come back? No? Stephen?
Chair, just one point in response to Councillor Dupree, and that's actually on the issue of organisational performance and how that's addressed. I'm concerned to hear that as a committee chair, the officers accountable for the performance that you're scrutinising aren't there to respond to questions from you and your committee. They do attend strategy and resources when specific issues are being raised. I can cite, for example, the head of information governance attending to be scrutinised on performance around freedom of information and subject access requests. So if members of a committee are concerned that officers are not in attendance and not being held to account and scrutinised for performance, then members are perfectly within their rights to ask for the relevant officers to be in attendance, and the executive director for the committee area responsible should be ensuring that that's the case. So that is certainly not universally the case in all of our committees. So I do think that's something that can be readily followed up because it should be happening already. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Isha?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the length of meetings and obviously providing some evidence with ENGI accepted. Strategy and resources on the 27th of June in 2022 started at 10 and finished at 3:45 in the afternoon. And highways and transport on the 7th of March this year started at 10 o'clock and finished after 4 o'clock. So I don't think it's always adults and health. There are a few other committees. That doesn't happen all the time, but it has happened.
Thank you. Councillor Maguire?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because 2 of the members have spoken so far. I'll be fairly lengthy. That's it. Oh, sorry, yeah. I don't have a good Scottish brew except when I'm either drinking me. As the chief exec probably knows. Thank you, but so apologies. I'll just say again, I don't intend to be very long. Those of you who have served on sort of committees that I've served on will have probably heard me say on occasions that some of our meetings are too long. And I think where I disagree with Councillor Dupree is on the basis of, well, you know, so what is the right time? What is the length? It's not necessary. If we are shown a meeting that's been expected to last 3 hours, 4 hours, that's fine. Most people will work their diaries around it. It's the amount that is on the agenda for that sort of time. And I think the example that Michelle's just given us of the highways one was because of the matters that were on the agenda. And that's what takes time. And if we're going to do the agenda justice, then we don't want to reach the point where people are leaving when there's still matters to be discussed. And that's what happens when if you haven't allocated sufficient time for it. I've been a sub largely on adults and health in the past, but I've recently joined it. And I was quite amazed at I appreciate there are effectively two parts of it. And just as an aside, some members who are on adults and health, we're actually having a scheduled meeting on Friday, a Zoom meeting or Teams meeting, very short notice one, I'm not sure if I can make it, which is like a pre-scrutiny. And it made me recall, and if you look at the appendix, Chairman, the introduction on the appendices from this Ed Hammond talks about how back in 2014, when the time the council was it switched from the leader cabinet system to the committee system. And that was the wish of the council at that time. But I can well remember somebody actually saying, and not a member of the administration at that time, but the opposition, saying, oh, but we'll keep the scrutiny committees, won't we? So they wanted the executive thing, which came, if I recall right, it was forced on us under the Tony Blair's government, I think if my memory is right. And it was something very few of us were used to, but one of the benefits was that there was an opportunity for every member to get involved at the scrutiny stage and really do I believe quite well on scrutiny and challenging, doing an overview as well as scrutiny, but the opportunity, which means you get to have a look at it before the decisions are made as well as after. So in some, but I agree with the report because it's what some of us have been saying to some time. There's obviously fine tuning. It is one organisation's snapshot opinion of us, and I think in time we will work out what we want to do. But I do believe that the scrutiny function for us is very, very important. And if I am thinking, oh my gosh, I've got another arrangement for this afternoon, and now here hanging on too long, I'm going to end up leaving. And we've seen it. We've all seen it. So, and I don't think that's good practice. One other thing I did want to pick up, just in case it doesn't get picked up by the officers when they look at report writing. I think it's the particular meeting that Michelle was referring to. We had an item on the closure of a school. And it was quite interesting because a lot of members of the public were saying, and I was picking it up, others were picking up, but saying it to me particularly, but you've already predetermined. This is a waste of time. You've already determined what the thing's going. And I said, no. And in defence of the committee and the chair, I said, no, we haven't predetermined it. We've still got a meeting to discuss it, and then it goes on to another meeting anyway. But what they pointed out to me, and I raised it, and if you look back, you'll see through the records, was the report from the education department kept referring to themselves as the council. The council had done this research, the council had spoken to the dioceses, so the council had held meetings with these different people. And I had to point out, no, we are the council, we haven't determined that, we haven't had these meetings. That was officers that had those meetings. We're the council, and the council hasn't yet made a decision. But the perception to some members of the public is, you've already made your mind up. So there's just an example of where report writing is important. And the officers acknowledged, yeah, they shouldn't have used the term council when they were actually referring to our education officers, because they were the ones who were actually doing that research. So I just use that as an example, Chairman, where improvement can be made. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. If I can make a few points. Firstly, Emma referred to Thurrock, and I have very briefly looked at the Thurrock Best Value report, which talks about the widespread failure in Thurrock's financial governance and leadership functions. The challenges facing Thurrock stem from a series of self-sustaining systemic weaknesses which have allowed for repeated failures over many years. I'm delighted that the conclusions from this report that we are nowhere near Thurrock, and for people to imply we are there or we are getting there is misleading. The conclusion in 2.6 says this is a broadly positive affirmation of the council's direction of travel in terms of governance and structures and culture. However, I do share Lorna's concerns that there is a lot in this report which is confusing and I would have welcomed more consideration and discussion about it. Mark kindly mentioned the Adults and Health Committee and how much better the last meeting seemed. I'm not sure if that was entirely down to the chair, but certainly there was a big part of it. But it is related to the agenda, whether moving aspects of social care to a new communities committee and moving public health to a health and wellbeing board are the right things to do. I rather doubt. The whole idea of bringing adults and health together with adults and adult social care in the morning and the scrutiny sessions in the afternoon was to try and get a holistic assessment of everything that was going on. So I think splitting it up is probably the wrong thing to do. The other thing I just wanted to clarify was about recommendation 2 and precisely what is implied by improving briefing sessions. So it talks about refocusing spokes meetings to be briefing sessions, but then in C, it talks about reinstating a members seminar program, which I do tend to agree with, to deal with information items that don't require a decision. Now, I think it's confusing to do both, and I would want a bit more clarity as to what was going to go one way and what was going to go in a different way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just deal with that point initially, and I've got a couple of other observations. In terms of that member awareness, we've had spokes operating at the authority for a while, and I think the focus has moved slightly from where they were to where they are now, which is effectively a rehearsal for the meeting. So initially, spokes, and the terms of reference are still there, were meant to be a more informal session for members across the group to look at items that might come for decision making at some point in the future, to have that discussion with the executive director in terms of what was happening, what might come forward. So refocusing spokes on what their original intention and their terms of reference actually say, I think will be helpful. Now, that won't cover for information items for all members. So, for example, on highways matters, we might brief the spokespersons in one way about particular issues coming forward, but actually all members might need to know about some of those issues. So I think the difference between the member seminar programme is, I'm going to say this is going to sound awful, it's a sheep dip for all members. But spokes is really focused around that committee so that members get the context of that committee, so that spokes is used as an area for discussion with the executive director about stuff that might come forward, but isn't just a rehash of what you're going to discuss at the committee, because I think that's just having effectively the same meeting twice. So I think that will be helpful. And that sort of comes on to my next point. Thurrock is a really good read, and it's not just about the money. The issues there are the systemic failures that we need to watch out for, and there are some key items there. So one of the big issues at Thurrock was the lack of transparency, and that's something which, as an authority, we've committed to ultimate transparency. I think one of the issues with having so many member working groups is actually you muddy the waters in where the decision is being made. So I think it is useful to review those, and Councillor du Preez picked up on how that's going to be done. I think we need to do that with the individual committees to say which working groups are useful to you, because they effectively parent those member working groups. So I think that that's a useful piece of work for the committees to lead on. That transparency leads on to scrutiny. Where you don't have good scrutiny, you're likely to have governance failure and risk. So it's really important that we create the space in our agendas to do some adequate, decent scrutiny, which I think that, my observation as the monitoring officer that's been in place for a limited amount of time is we're not really doing what we should be doing on that. And that, not many things keep me awake at night, but good scrutiny is one of those things which is quite difficult to crack. And I want that to happen for the authority, because that's how we mitigate against governance failure. That leads on to that information sharing I talk about. Members who know more are less likely to feel bounced into a decision, makes not sensible decisions, to question officers. Coming back to Thurrock, reports went through on the nod. That's not what we want as officers. We want members to be questioning them, but we have to tell you about the system so that you know the questions to ask. So that information sharing, that report writing stuff, again, report writing identified in Thurrock, are really, really important as that kind of cornerstone of a good governance system. So those are the areas I think that helpfully we can do more work on, and the report references some of those. And I think that, an important part of mitigating against governance risk is actually being self-aware and being mature enough to accept that, we're not going to be perfect the whole time. There are absolutely areas we need to work on, but governance is everyone's responsibility. It's not mine, it's not chief executives, it's not Michelle's alone, it's everybody's.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Yeah, it's a question for Emma, really. It's your report, Emma. Recommendation C. What is the timing? What timing do you have in your mind to get this to present to full council? Year? Just to help Councillor Dupre with some other questions.
There's going to be a bit of work, which means redrafting part of the SNR terms of reference in creating a new committee. I think that the timeline for that is around September, because that would effectively, it's got to be agreed with the chair, but we would be talking to other members about that as well. The rest of the recommendations are going to be done as we get to them. So it's not going to be a massive big bang approach. I think we've done that first piece of work around working groups. So I think we know what we have now. And the next piece of work around that will be taking it back to the committees and saying, this is what you have. What can we do? And also talking to officers about, it's almost like an officer default position. If I need to consult a member, I'll have a member steering group, but actually there are lots of ways of engaging and consulting members. So actually looking at some of that along with the member officer protocol as well, because that feeds into that. So how do we engage local members? How do we keep people informed? The member steering group seems to be the default option, and it's not a terribly sophisticated way of engaging members or efficient way of engaging members where they need to do. So that will probably take a bit longer. The member development and education programme, I think we can start pulling those together in the autumn, really getting people in, getting some engaging training for members, rather than, something that's boring and just talking at you all the time. We've got some good trainers on our books. So I think that most of the work will be complete just by after Christmas. The drafting is the least problematic of it all, actually. The getting the things embedded is more difficult.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's all very positive. The danger is introducing some parts of this, introducing it, and then finding that in 6 months' time, when you do the further review, you have to go back and change something else. So hopefully you'll have your eyes wide open on all of that. Yes.
Sure.
If I could add 2 points to what Emma's just said. As regards the timetable, if we are introducing a new committee, we're going to have to relook at proportionality, and that would need to come to July council. Otherwise, we couldn't introduce everything in September. We'd have to wait till October to do that. And the other point relates to Councillor Wilson's point about the spokes system. As Emma said, we've had the terms of reference to how spokes was managed some time ago, and I don't know whether this happens now, but previously there was a strong link between the spoke for each individual group reporting back to their policy planning panels. So if you're being briefed at spokes of big issues happening within directorates or services that aren't actually coming to committee, as for some time, your job as spokes is to actually report back to your group so that all members of your group are briefed, unless it's confidential, are briefed about what's going on within a service. So I think that used to happen. I don't know whether that happens now. It probably does, but I think that would need to be reinforced with if such a system was introduced.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. There's some, I think, very good ideas in this report, but it I do have some reservations, and it does contradict itself. At times, I think as Councillor Wilson said regarding the spokes, one hand says, you know, we should focus on, refocus them, you know, don't have just discussion about what's on the agenda, and then suggest that we actually keep that. And on the frequency of meetings, it says meetings are too long, but then says keep them the same, keep the frequency the same, have 4 dates and then 4 reserved dates as well. Couple of things on Cosmic. As Councillor Dupre says, it doesn't really deal with where the EDI issues are dealt with. And then it seems to say that some of the work on social care should go to the Communities Committee. It's just being retitled. I have a number of reservations on some of these recommendations here, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kingsley.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of comments that I want to make, and I come to this really as a bit of an innocent, because I don't sit on any of the service committees, and I have only attended 1 or 2 as a sub. So I do sense that in the kind of structure of the conversation so far, there is an element, and I wouldn't put it any more than that, there is an element of protection of one's assets. And I wouldn't put it any stronger than that. But I think that it did make me think about a couple of things. The first of all, Councillor Dupre mentioned there were things missing, and I agree with her certainly on one point, which is a great deal of comment was made in this process about some member behaviours needed to be addressed and improved. And the response to that is actually about education, and it is about making sure people are up to date and so on. Doesn't actually address the behaviour issues that were being initially referred to. And that's sort of borne out by the fact that the inspectors, for want of a better word, spent a lot of time and probably heartache watching a number of our debates online. And it does make me concerned that there is this issue is not being addressed of member behaviours in a very explicit way. Again, it makes me concerned that Councillor Goldsack referred to his doubt about whether very many, if any, apart from one of the group leader of the Conservative group, were involved in this process. I'm not really asking for confirmation one way or the other, but it just highlights for me the political realities of Cambridgeshire County Council as currently. And those political realities are that the joint administration is made up effectively of 3 parties, begging your pardon, Councillor Sanderson. And those 3 parties obviously are working together for the first time, governed by an agreement. But that does also mean that those 3 parties have to manage how they behaved politically up to the point where they signed the joint agreement. So you have, and it's worked extremely well, I have to say. I think there are really fantastic relationships between the joint administration groups, but at the beginning, there was again a certain amount of protectionism. So everybody wanted to go to everything because they didn't want to be left out of anything. Conversely, I think the Conservative group being in opposition for the well, because you were minority leadership, weren't you, before? I think there were real problems there because suddenly everything had gone. And whether or not in the next 2 years of this municipal period, those kind of member behaviours will sort themselves out, I don't know, but it was identified as an issue and does need to be addressed. I think, again, there is a duplication of effort potentially in terms of spokes and seminars. In this day and age, I think seminars can easily be recorded and made available to everybody, even those of us who have full-time working jobs, so that we can watch them over the weekend, because I know that is what a lot of members want to do. It does mean, of course, you're not there live asking a question that might come up, But on the other hand, you are in front of a seminar. And again, the spokes system, its flaw is that everybody wants to do everything everywhere. They don't want to miss out on anything. And so I don't think we've sort of bottomed that one out yet. I think the other problem with the spokes system, as it were, is that it does require everyone to play together. And this is sort of anecdotal, but I do understand that certainly Conservative spokes are not as regular perhaps in attendance as they could be. And I think this goes back to the point I made about Conservative group being in opposition. There is, you know, it's a difficult thing. You still have to keep battling on and doing the job, don't you? And it might be a bit dispiriting when everything goes against you all the time, if you see what I mean. We've all been there. I have a question or possibly even a suggestion in relation to the proposal for a new committee. I'm not an enthusiast for any more committees, to be honest. It does strike me that one way of seeing our way through this, I know Michelle's going to explain mathematically why it's not possible, but it would seem to me a way of seeing through recommendation 5 is that strategy and resources meets with the same membership, but as a different committee. In other words, it is the same thing as the assets and procurement committee. I'm going to explain that very well. When you have a S&R meeting, you then have lunch, and then you reconvene as the assets and procurement committee. I sense that adds more numbers to the total seats, but if it doesn't, that is something perhaps we could think about. So where I'm kind of ending up with this is I'm not as cross about it as Councillor du Preez, and I'm not as concerned about it as perhaps other members. But what I do think it would be useful is if all members could have an opportunity to sit down in a seminar environment and actually talk through all of these recommendations before they go to council on July the 18th. I think it's, to be honest, I think it's probably something that we owe to both ourselves, the writers of the report, and all other members of the council, because ultimately this is about getting it right. And I take the monitoring officer's point that this is a process. It's not all going to change automatically overnight. It's not, you know, radical changes. But I think we need to have the confidence, both for the joint administration and for the opposition, that we're all heading in the same direction, although we may not agree with various elements of it. So I would propose, Chair, and I'm happy to be shot down by the monitoring officer, Councillor du Preez, and the chief executive, that we, in concert, that we perhaps ask the administration to organise that seminar. Whether this means a delay before these recommendations end up in full council, I do not know. July the 18th isn't that far away. Anyway, there you go. Those are my thoughts as an innocent abroad.
Thank you. Michelle?
Just come back on your point about a separate committee that you were suggesting. I think what you would have to do if you wanted to do what you're proposing is strategy and resources would have to meet more often, basically, and then you wouldn't need to change proportionality. I think that's the only way we could achieve that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Godson.
Thank you. I was just going to come back on a couple of, well, if I can come back on something that Michelle has said, and then just something that Sebastian has said, if I can, please, or Councillor Kingsley, sorry. That's exactly how we do operate. We come to the spokes. I totally accept the comments that Sebastian had just brought to the table about attendance. That's something that we are constantly fighting and pushing. But I do, the model after that is it comes back to PPP, disseminated out in a report that's then there for everybody to question in the group to share that information. So just want to lay that clear. Secondly, it would be really useful, Emma, in support of what Sebastian has proposed, which I'm personally not against. I'm not, you know, everybody's got a free opinion here. What I would suggest is that on the methodology element of the report, it says interviews and with councillors and officers, 19 people were interviewed. I think to get rid of that fear, you want to come back and embarrass me and say there were 7 Conservatives and 12 of the administration, I'll walk away with my tail between my leg and be embarrassed about it. But I don't believe that that's the case, having asked our group. So did you see what I'm saying there? I think we would have much more power in the feedback of this if it was shared, but I don't believe it was.
Misha.
Just to come back on that, my understanding, and I would need to check, that it was predominantly group leaders, may have been deputies at the time, and chairs and vice chairs of committees. So I think you are correct in your assumption.
I think that actually entirely makes our point in my words earlier, which is, you know, so think about carefully how to say this. So members of the administration are all saying that all's well with a committee, when members of the opposition are saying it's not. So to go back on a well-made point that Councillor Dupre made earlier, it's not both parties saying this is wrong. One saying it's right and the other one saying it's wrong.
Come back, I need to stress that there was a survey that went out to all councillors.
Okay, I can't see any more hands up, so can we go for the recommendations?
Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, before you do, Chair. I did ask, rather than making a proposal, I did ask if the Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer had any view on a suggestion that we workshop this with all members before taking it further.
Thank you very much. In terms of the adjustments of the Constitution, so that's effectively the terms of reference of the committees and splitting them. That is at the moment proposed to be delegated to be in consultation with the chair and vice chair. So we've got member involvement there. With the rest of the items, they aren't. There is an envelope where work can be done within that. So when we're talking about working groups, when we're talking about training, when we're talking about spokes, when we're talking about briefing, all of that is subject. You could be subject to further discussion and work within a working group. So that is where your wiggle room is within the recommendations. So a lot of the work is not me and Michelle doing the Constitution, or actually it'll probably be Nick, to be fair. It's, you know, it's around that other stuff which actually probably impacts on members more. So I think there you can absolutely have those discussions, and the officers can set up briefings and workshops to work all that stuff through. With the proposed recommendations in terms of the changes to the Constitution on the terms of reference, that's with you two. And I would suggest that you would want to take the, you know, the views of your colleagues into account when you're talking to me about that. So there doesn't mean to say that if it goes to council, this is your first, you know, your last bite of the cherry. We can give you wiggle room within those things that aren't the Constitution. Do that. The Constitution stuff is with you guys, but obviously then you've got feedback loops into this committee and into your groups as well.
Councillor Dupre?
It seems to me that Councillor Kindersley and Emma are talking about two different ways around. I thought Councillor Kindersley was suggesting that there might be some sort of member discussion, informally, some workshop before this goes to full council, so that those areas of concern, ambiguity, uncertainty could be discussed before members are asked to stick their hands up or use the raise hand function as the chair described it in support of this. What's being suggested by Emma is the other way round, that, you know, we jump off the diving board and only then are we you know, asked to test the temperature of the water. You know, I thought that Councillor Kindersley was asking for something the other way around, which I would have been happier with. And I realise you can't only have a workshop once ever, but something beforehand might have been useful, given that there have been a number of comments about areas of uncertainty and you know, conflict within the report.
Okay, who wants to go first, Emma?
I mean, I think there's nothing, in terms of briefing members, absolutely we do that, but the officer recommendations have to be the recommendations from the report. You've got an independent report, you asked for an independent report, it's part of the corporate peer challenge. I think that my advice as your monitoring officer is that we can't gerrymander the recommendations at this stage to do something different for council. There is, if as the chief executive said, if you don't want to accept the recommendations, that is your call as members. The advice you've had from the officers is these are areas where we can do better on in terms of our governance. We have suggested ways round to help members in terms of development of that, the briefing models, the spokes, the working groups, that's absolutely fine. We've got the terms of reference subject to the consultation with the chair and the vice chair. But what we're not able to do is have a session in between now and the council where the recommendations magically change, because that ain't going to be happening.
Really need to come back on that, because that is not what I said, and using words like gerrymander, I'm sorry, it's deeply unhelpful. What I was suggesting was that, as several members have said, there are some areas where there is concern or uncertainty, genuine uncertainty, because the report does contradict itself in places. And what I was talking about was not a secret way of having some plan in which we could change the recommendations. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, I thought Councillor Kindersley made a really good suggestion that in order to discuss what these things might look like, to clear up areas of ambiguity, to fully understand how what is being proposed would work on the ground, it might be useful to talk about it. I don't see that as trying to gerrymander the report out of existence or change the recommendations in some way. That's not what this was about. And I didn't think that was what Councillor Kindersley was proposing. I thought what Councillor Kindersley was proposing was very sensible, and if he had proposed it, I would certainly have seconded it.
Misha.
I think we would struggle. Council is on the 18th. The agenda is published on the 10th of July. That gives you just 2 weeks in order to set up. And within that, we have to write a report as well. I think it's going to be a very tight time frame.
Emma? Okay, I'll go from Matt. Sorry, Councillor Maguire.
That's all right. That's all right, Chair. Yeah, I was getting slightly confused there, because I do understand the point, because I took it that Vice Chair's suggestion was straightforward seminar. I understand what Michelle's saying in terms of timing, but I just wonder which is the more important, that all members have the opportunity to have a discussion around this report, rather than we rush it through because we have to meet certain dates, because we can always put it back. Recommendation C, and this is probably where I'm disagreeing with Emma on it. Recommendation C says that the delegation to yourselves, the officers in consultation, is to draft amendments to the Constitution. So ultimately, what you appear to be saying, and that's what I understood, said, and that would then come back either to Constitution and Ethics or to full council. So that is in essential timing. But to inform that drafting, I understood what the Vice Chair was saying, where you have a seminar so you get an input from all members and not just the Constitution and Ethics Committee and group leaders, whoever else has talked about this report. Therefore, I would support having a seminar, and I don't know how you fit it in, Michelle, but if it means delaying this thing coming eventually to a full council, so be it. I think we could live with it. I think most of us will take on board much of what's said, notwithstanding the formalities of committees and this sort of thing. Whether it's how we treat each other, how we respect to officers. I think most of us will take that on board anyway, if we're felt that we're found wanting. So I would like to support a seminar at some stage, a workshop, seminar, call it what you like. We did used to have them quite frequently, and they were generally effective. They weren't always well attended. My only personal problem is I don't like the online ones. I'm a face-to-face person. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Ambrose.
Thank you, Chair. Emma, I back you 110%. We should get on with it. We don't need a seminar between now and July. You've said all what you've said, but what can happen after the full council meeting? You have my trust. I trust you with what you said, that you can make it work going forward with all the seminars, the workshops and so forth. So you have my backing, and I will not vote for a seminar in between now and July. So there we are.
Emma?
I mean, if I've misunderstood what Councillor Kindersley was proposing, I'm apologise, but absolutely information sharing with members is where we're trying to get to so that members can make decisions. I mean, it is a decision, you know, that, you know, in terms of the changes to the constitution that all members will need to look at. So I don't think that would necessarily be a problem, provided we can get a date for it. What I think that would reassure people is that outside the strict constitutional changes, the other stuff which we're talking about, more, I'll say touchy-feely stuff, but for a lawyer, it's touchy-feely, where we need that discussion with members so that they understand how, you know, we can talk to members about how they want to be briefed, whether it's online or not online, you know, where, you know, how we're going to run spokes, you know, because how do we get that connectivity, you know, between the, you know, into the groups so that everyone has got as much information as they need to make the decisions. All of that stuff can be worked out later. Members, you know, groups decide under the member officer protocol how they want to be briefed. So, you know, under the member officer protocol, groups are entitled to private briefings from officers in relations to areas of policy, anything like that. So there is a great deal of wiggle room for us to be able to discuss with individual groups about what works with them. As an officer, as officers, we need to ensure that members are appropriately briefed when they come to meetings so they can make decisions. To be honest, I think that this, you know, the governance review here contains some useful stuff to us. It's a point in time. You know, my advice as the monitoring officer is this is not going to be massive change. I think we have got change that we need to make. And that is around hard work that's not in the Constitution. It's around report writing. It's around that development of the scrutiny function. It's all those things. So this for me it's a touch point, but not something which, you know, I don't think anyone needs to die in a ditch over. But I am hearing what you're saying around some of the concerns you have around how those things are going to be implemented. And what I'm saying to you is that we can do that outside the recommendations. You know, we can work with the groups to get those right. And members through their groups will have an input into that. But if what it takes to move this forward, because I think actually it's helpful if we can move it forward at some point, otherwise it languishes in the background. If a seminar is what members want, then that's I'm quite happy to provide that as soon as we can get a date for that. And if members aren't happy, then perhaps we will need to delay the approval to delay sending the item to council so that we can create space for that.
Councillor Goldson.
In an attempt to try and help move this forward, Councillor Ambrose Smith asked a question earlier, which was replied that the likelihood of implementation of this was around springtime next year. Is that what I heard?
The changes to the constitution, i.e. the terms of reference of the committee, would be from September. That's where we were aiming for, Councillor Goldsack.
Oh, okay. Then I'll stop speaking because I thought I'd heard that as next spring, and there I was going to suggest actually missing July's and making for the next one wasn't the worst thing in the world, and so that we had time for the thing. So I apologise.
Councillor Kingsley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to have caused so much confusion. I totally take the point the monitoring officer is making about the constitutional changes simply being agreed between the monitoring officer, chair and vice chair of this committee. That's a standard thing which raises no issues at all. I suppose what my concern was that concerns had been expressed by members of the committee about some of the recommendations. Hearing from the monitoring officer that it's, I'm paraphrasing here, it's a kind of take it or leave it situation in that we can't amend the recommendations. We either agree them to council or we don't. But I feel that it would be made much easier if there had been, or if there was more information shared with all members, which might sound slightly unfair because, of course, obviously this agenda is open to all. I think that people will have concerns, and I just feel that having a workshop or seminar before that council meeting will mean that the debate at that council meeting would be considerably curtailed, not least because those complaining who didn't attend the seminar would be on very thin ice.
Emma?
The recommendations in the CFGS report can't be changed. The recommendations you have on the front of paper can be subject to amendment. You haven't met the 2 days notice, so it's under Procedure Rule 15, it's in the gift of the chair. It's in your absolute discretion. It's in exceptional circumstances and to ensure the efficient discharge of the business, but you could add in there about that seminar if that was proposed and seconded. And you took that as Councillor Kingsley has said.
Michelle?
I just wanted to be helpful. Going back to what Emma said, there are, I think it's recommendation 5 and recommendation 6, and probably the first recommendation in recommendation 7, which are actually changes to the terms of reference. And given the time frame that you've got regarding the July meeting, I wonder whether it's worth just arranging a session to cover that. If we draft the terms of reference, which I think we already have prepared a draft, and we can share those with officers, executive directors, as well as the members here for you to look at. Maybe it might be worth focusing on that, which requires actually a constitutional change at council. And then we could have a further workshop later on to deal with everything else. I think if we try to deal with it all in one go, we will fail.
Sorry, Chair, if I could come in, it would be helpful perhaps to hear from Councillor Dupre her views on this, given that she is the one who started this all. You expressed your concern.
Councillor Dupre?
And there I was, just being so supportive of you, Councillor Kindersley. I just feel that a lot of this, if the changes in the report are to succeed, they will require a level of member ownership across the authority. And just having them done to members is not a good thing if you want to engender that kind of ownership among the council. Because this will depend on not only officers making it work, but members making it work. And I think we need to feel more, well, everybody else may feel that they own this. At the moment, I don't. And if I'm the only one, I'll happily shut up. If other people feel that, and I'm sorry, I know Councillor Ambrose Smith has agreed and he doesn't want a seminar, but if it seems to me that splitting it, if members are minded that that is a good way to start the process of owning this, then I think splitting it up, as Michelle has suggested, is exceedingly helpful. And I would expect nothing less from Michelle. And so if other members were minded to feel that that's something they would like to explore, I think that is a very good solution to the time pressure around all of this.
Okay, we're getting to nearly an hour and a half on this, so I think we need to start closing it down. Councillor Maguire.
This makes the point we were saying earlier on, Chairman, about making sure we give it a fair crack of the whip. You're absolutely right, though. Well, I'm not quite sure. I think I like the suggestion that Michelle's come out with, and I think I understand Councillor Dupre is happy with it. And if you, as the original proposer, but what I want to say, do we actually need to make an amendment to these recommendations that are in front of us today? Not the recommendations from the report, but the recommendations on our agenda item. Do we have to make a change to them to be able to organise a workshop to all along the lines of what's been taught? I don't see why we do, because Councillor Ambrose Smith said he wouldn't vote for something, but well, I don't know, there's a vote on that, whether we're having a seminar or not. Why do we have to make a change? I don't think we do. You just go ahead and organise it. Is Michelle nodding in agreement with me?
Councillor Wilson?
Well, in which case this may be irrelevant, but I must admit I'm beginning to lose the plot. I'm very happy that recommendations 1 to 4 are separated from recommendations 5 to 7. But I just feel that recommendations 5 to 7 is where the sensitivity is going to be with other members. So particularly members of the Adults and Health Committee, unless they are bought into why things are changing on their committee, and same with Tom, why things are changing on Cosmic, they will just sort of feel that they're not involved at all, and they're just being done to rather than getting involved in this. So I would prefer us to have the workshop, if we're having a workshop, to go through precisely what is being changed and why. If that is what Michelle is proposing, fine, but I thought she was saying the workshop would be on the first 4 items. In the meantime, everything else would go ahead. Right.
Michelle?
Just for clarity, the workshop will be on the items that actually require a constitutional change. Anything that doesn't, which Emma's explained, there's certain things here that are not in the constitution and they could be worked up. There's less pressure on doing those items. So that is, you're right, as I said, it's 5, 6 and 7. Yeah.
In which case I take that back, Jerry. That's very helpful. That's precisely what I think we should be doing, and having that discussion before full council in order that people are brought into it. Thank you.
Chair, if I could make then a formal proposal that we ask officers to organise a seminar to discuss the constitutional changes proposed in recommendations 5, 6 and 7 prior to the council meeting, and that's the end of the proposal. So from my perspective, it allows members to come along and get informed about these constitutional changes and the implications thereof, which will mean that when it comes to debate and vote at the council meeting, hopefully members will feel much more comfortable supporting the recommendations from the peer review that we can't change. In other words, we get to a binary decision position at council. It's either for or against and the package. But I think that if members have had the opportunity to be informed about the implications, it should go much better.
Okay, is everyone happy with what's just been?
I made a formal proposal up to the point where I said that's the end of the proposal. So
yeah, but I thought I'm needing an explanation. I don't understand why we need a formal proposal. We've got recommendations in here. Why can't we just go ahead and leave the officers to organise that? Why do you have to make a formal proposal? Because it's in the chairman's gift, as we know from our constitution, to take an amendment. We've got a formal proposal. If it's backed, it becomes an amendment effectively to the recommendations. That's my concern, is that you
So yeah, advice. What's the best thing, Emma?
Well, I'm quite happy to undertake as the monitoring officer to organise that, you know, and to deliver that, so that, you know, we don't need to accept, you know, we don't need to deal with it by way of amendments. That can be minuted, and that'll go on my to-do list, and Michelle's as well.
Okay, thanks, Emma. So is that okay, Councillor Kinsley?
Yep.
You're happy with that? Is everybody else happy with that? Okay, so can we go for the recommendations then? Got 3 recommendations. Do you want me to read out each one, or do you want to take it as a block? Okay, can I please have a show of hands then, members?
Sorry, Chair, you're asking us if we approve the recommendations?
Yes.
I think some of us have said that we don't have reservations about them. Am I wrong? So I'm not. Sorry, okay, well, that's fine. I was just surprised some members have raised their hands to that, sorry.
Right, okay, so can we go for the recommendations? Those in favour, can you put your hands up, please? Yeah, 2, 4, 6. 6 in favour. Those against? Those abstaining? 3. Okay, thank you very much, members. Okay, we now go on to item 5. Is the Cambridge Joint Area Committee report. The Director of Highways and Transport will now introduce the report. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So the Cambridge Joint Area Committee. This paper presents a proposal to re-establish the Cambridge Joint Area Committee, which I'll refer to as CJAC after this, if that's okay with everybody. It includes the draft terms of reference, which are subject to the potential modification by the Service Director of Legal and Governance in consultation with the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability, in discussion with the City Council and ultimately through approval by the Cambridge City Council and County Council. The proposal would enable the County Council and the City Council to work together and develop a more decentralised approach to matters relating to highways and transport affecting Cambridge. This model of joint working could potentially be replicated in the future for other districts working with district councils who actively support the principle of more decentralised approach, and for a range of issues which would not need to be specifically related to highways and transport and could include a broader range of local issues. Officers of the County Council, the City Council and Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership have looked at what transport and planning functions and powers would be most beneficially held at an area committee level in the city geography to best support business need and the efficient delivery of the county objectives. A key consideration in those discussions was to identify decision-making powers that would not adversely affect the current governance structure, and a summary of that structure has been presented within the report. A number of powers have been identified to complement the current governance arrangements and also provide a long-term approach for local decision-making beyond the life of the GCP. There is a very clear benefit as well in the Cambridge Joint Area Committee considering local highway improvements to shape and determine those local schemes which help overcome issues that are so important to the local communities within the city. The City Council has also proposed delegations which are included within the draft terms of reference. These are under consideration and would be confirmed through the City Council's own governance processes. It is proposed that the terms of reference would be reviewed on a regular basis through the CJAC and by both partners, considering opportunities to add additional powers from both authorities with the aim of furthering stronger place-based decentralised partnership working. These functions and powers need not be restricted to highways and transport matters in the future. The committee is asked to approve the re-establishment of this joint area committee on the basis of the initial draft terms of reference presented.
Thank you very much, Sue. We have now received one request to speak on this item from Councillor Alexa Billett, the member of the Abbey Division. Does the committee consent to her request to speak?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's just me.
Yeah. Okay. So, Councillor Billett, do you want to speak?
Yes, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to speak on this item. I'd like just to say a bit about my perspective as Vice Chair of the Communities Committee, because of course this proposal is part of the wider decentralization agenda, and we'll have a paper at Cosmic as well, looking at other decentralization work, as well as within adults and health. So just to kind of contextualize this and the importance of this as a part of a wider package of devolving more local decision-making to local communities in Cambridge City and beyond. But today I would like to represent some of the views from my colleagues in Cambridge City Council who couldn't be here today to speak. And I have spoken to them over the last few weeks, and they have done much more work on this particular issue than I have done. And I would like to kind of share their support for this proposal today on their behalf, especially City Councillor Richard Robertson, who sat on the original CJAC committee in the city, alongside his colleague Katie Thornborough from the City Council. Both of them, alongside other colleagues, have put on a lot of work trying to look at some of the gaps left after the CJAC was the structure didn't exist anymore, after it was disbanded in, I think, in 2020, and looking at the arguments of why actually we need this more decentralized approach, way of working, especially around infrastructure, around transport and highways in the city. But of course, as the report says, this would go beyond, and we can look at other areas as well. It's also important to consider, as members of the committee, how strong the support in the city is for the reinstatement of this committee. Of course, you may remember debates when the committee was discontinued and the strength of the public speakers around this issue at the time. But since then, a lot of the people in the City Council have been working towards this. And on the 15th of May, the City Council had a meeting discussing that should the CJAC be formed again, what their opinion is on this. And there was a very clear, strong support expressed from the city for this proposal. So if we're serious about decentralization and delivering what communities would like to see, we have to take into consideration this strong support from the district level in the city. From my perspective, CJAC would benefit a lot actually communicating some of the GCP work at the local level. There is, I think it's fair to say, like a lack of trust or limited trust in some of the proposals, some of the structures of governance on transport and highways, and actually bringing decision making more at the local level, and some of the discussions would actually benefit the image that we have as the council as well, taking some of those decisions. But at a more practical level, I think it will really benefit the work on local highways improvements, and for the communities to feel that they have more ownership over some of those decisions and discussions, and in particular for the city, the issue around pavement parking. So linking to the motion that we passed as a council as well a few months ago. So I'm really pleased to see this proposal. I'm really pleased the proposal goes a bit beyond, perhaps opening up beyond the areas of highways and transport in other districts who may want to consider this. And I'm really supportive about this, and just want to highlight the very strong sense of support on this in the city from the City Council, the Labour-led City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burnett. I remember that committee very well. I was a member. Okay, thank you, members. We'll now move to the debate. Councillor Maguire. Councillor Dupre.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, I'm not entirely happy with this proposal. In fact, we'll probably vote against it. I say probably because I obviously want to listen to the debate and the arguments. But there seems to be, if you look at paragraph 1.5, it actually starts off: the re-establishment of the Joint Area Committee in Cambridge would provide a model, and then working with district councils who actively support the principle. I should preface what I'm saying by saying that, yeah, I believe it's important that we always look forward and try to evolve and bring things, but I'm afraid history plays a part in this. We had, and some of you may remember, certainly some of the officers, we had area joint committees right across the county. Each of the districts had an area joint committee. That area joint committee was principally dealing with highways. So it wasn't decentralization of everything into, which is slightly, if I recall, separate from what used to happen in Cambridge City, where the city councillors get together with their colleague county councillors and discuss a multitude of things, not just highways, but and which I could understand the sense of that. How you get together with your district colleagues is entirely a matter for you. The suggestion that we go back to area joint committees would be inferring to me that we're doing what we used to do. And the reason, as I recall, I stand to be corrected, that the area joint committees were eventually abandoned is because the districts had a financial constraint on them, because the area joint committees used to do largely what our LHI panels do. And I was one of the founder members of the LHI principle, is because the the districts no longer wanted to put their money into the pot. We had a pot, we looked at highway schemes with the districts, they made a contribution, not as obviously as large as the county council's contribution. And again, we looked at parishes. When the districts decided they didn't want to do that, we said, well, there's not much point in having area and joint committees, say for in my case here in Huntingdonshire. And so we abandoned the idea. This paragraph and the way this paper is written, it infers that we will have this decentralization approach. So not just dealing with highways matters, but dealing with any matters. But for us to consider having an area joint committee with the district council would mean having that discussion with them. Are they willing to put the money where the mouth is? Would be my argument. And I don't think that's likely, we're likely to see that. So that's where the history comes into it. And I'm also concerned that, well, as I say, I don't mind how the city get together and meet with their colleagues thing, but for the county to do, you might as well start pushing hard to become a unitary authority where we take on the responsibility for a whole lot of the things. I wouldn't support that either. So, Chairman, I'm not happy with the way this paper infers. If you want in the city to get together with your city colleagues and how you do it, because one of the problems we suffer for those of us in the rural side of Cambridgeshire is we don't have that same involvement that we have as you have as in terms of the members. By that I mean it's, you know, it's part of the LHI thing. The way that's evolved is, you know, you almost have the one bid per councillor, per county councillor, whereas it sounds like in the city you're able to, by the very nature of the fact you don't have parishes, get together in a different way and affect the outcome of some of the LHI proposals. I've still got unease about it. So that's my view, Chairman. I find it difficult to support this paper.
Thank you. I've now got Councillor du Preez.
Thank you very much. I have to say that for a paper that I thought was going to be fairly dry, it gave me one of the biggest belly laughs I've had in quite a long time. I particularly loved paragraph 1.7. Given the current role and responsibilities of the GCP and the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, it is important that any re-established joint area committee for Cambridge does not compromise the legibility and efficiency of the current governance structures relating to highways and transport. I think that is the funniest thing I've read in a long time. That said, particularly because in fact those structures are so legible and efficient that further down the report they require 11 different rows on a chart to explain them. I've got a question about 2.7 and pavement parking licenses. The second bullet point says to determine pavement parking permits, but the list of functions in 1 Roman 4 says to consider and advise. And I wasn't clear which power it was they had or both, or what, whether I probably just misread something, but I was just wanting clarity about what that function is. And just finally, before things get absolutely baked into terms of reference on number 2, membership in this part of the Constitution, please can we have comprising rather than comprising of?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to remember this is actually a pilot project, and this has come from Cosmic, which apparently hasn't been very proactive, well, it has in this case, I'm pleased to say, and has on a number of other issues, as we'll see at our meeting on the 6th of July. But in terms of this, I think it's Councillor Maguire's concerns. I think I probably sat on the area joint committees as a district councillor many years ago, and I actually thought they worked quite well. I quite liked them, but I think you're right that districts had some reservations. They weren't able to invest in some of the projects as members would like. But with this, I think, as I say, very much a pilot project. Something I know the city are very keen to see re-established, feeds into our desire to decentralize issues. So I warmly welcome the report and the ideas. Thank you.
Can I make a point of explanation, personal explanation? Given the point that Councillor has made, the area joint committees that we had when I first got involved with this council worked well. So I agree with Councillor Sanderson. They did work well. I even chaired it at one time on the Huntingdonshire one. They worked well. But when the district council decided to stop funding it, which was part of the agreement, then they effectively collapsed. They were abandoned. And that's the point that's being made here. So unless you've got agreement with the district councils that they're willing to fund them again, and effectively could have replaced the LHI, because that's where LHI's developed from, when we decided we would continue to work with parishes and that and other parts of the community who wanted to make a contribution to something which would not maybe have got off been a priority for the county, but jointly could be managed. Then, but I say, Chairman, in case there's any misunderstanding, I'm not against the area joint committees, but they did, as we know, die a death, which was unfortunate.
Okay, I've got Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. I found this a fascinating paper for different reasons to Councillor Dupre, but I did welcome those. My problem stops around all around point 1.9. And the issue is, and Councillor Boulat said it in her speech, but I think it came from the other side, which is there's a general lack of trust from the city to the county. That's how I think that's what was said. Well, there's a general lack of trust from my group and my members and my ward members as to what's going on under the GCP. And under 1.9, I just fear that this is actually given power to the elbow for the GCP to complete their city deal programme, which includes the STZ, which is obviously probably the most controversial issue we've had in recent times and still got in recent times. If 1.9 wasn't here, I haven't got a major problem with this. It's before my time, CJAX, but most of the reporting and the research I've done was positive. But I don't feel at this juncture that it would be right to give more power over our highways to GCP, who, in my opinion, and I'll say it in this forum, don't seem to still be listening to users and people that come into Cambridge from outside the residents of living in Cambridge.
Thank you, Councillor Kingsley.
Thanks very much for that. So I think there are a couple of points to make. The first is that we're not looking at a one-size-fits-all solution here. If Cambridge City Council is willing to work, set up CJAC and participate in it with the County Council, then hurrah. If any of the other districts wish to, then there's nothing to stop them, and whether they want to or not is entirely their business. I sat on the South Cambridgeshire one, and the fatal blow was delivered as I think it was about 18 councillors turned up to consider an application for a disabled parking bay in Hardwick, I think it was. And anyway, we all lost drive and impetus as a result. So that's the first point I would make. The second point I would make is that Cambridge City, of course, is very different in that it is not parished. And the difference between CJAC and the LHI bids, for example, is that the parishes making the applications are prepared and willing to put in and required to put in financial contributions. So, as I say, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think what happens with LHI between parishes and the county is very successful. And I think CJAC was successful for Cambridge City, it suited their purposes, delivered what they want, and they want it back. So, hurrah.
Thank you. So, Sue, I'm not sure.
Chief Executive.
Sorry, Chief Executive wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. A few observations. First of all, I heard with interest members' views around the joint nature of this committee, which I think is really important. I would just emphasise the fact that if this is intended to work as a joint area committee, then of course we expect all partners to contribute jointly and not just see the county council devolving matters to this committee. I think I've been quite clear on that through officer conversations, but I think it's also important to reinforce that publicly here as well. I think there is an opportunity here, given if members will forgive the phrase, a rich tapestry of governance in Cambridge City, and particularly the multiple layers of bodies that are involved in matters relating to streetscape, roads, transportation. There is an opportunity to bring that together and make it more integrated and coordinated through this approach. So I think that's sensible. That said, I'm also very clear that this is being proposed as a pilot. And I think, again, members are equally clear that pilots do not mean things continue forevermore. They have to be successful to be sustained and embedded. So I think we also need to be clear that as a county council, along with our city council partners, and indeed the GCP and the combined authority, we will need to monitor the effectiveness of this, because it may be we need to take a decision to cancel it if it's not successful. Councillor Sanderson's right, it's absolutely a pilot, but pilots don't mean they just continue if they're not working for all concerned. So that's important that we keep monitoring that. And then finally, just as a point of clarification, the city deal for Greater Cambridge is actually ours as much as it is anybody else's. We were a co-signatory to the city deal, and indeed we applied for it along with other authorities. Therefore, the GCP is actually a construct of our making, along with others that are part of that. I accept the views from members that they've expressed, but I think we need to recognise the city deal was something we actively bid for as a county, along with others, and successfully achieved to unlock funding around transportation improvements and other connectivity issues. And finally, Chair, because I couldn't resist, as somebody who has worked in both counties and unitaries, I think I was quite clear with members when I was appointed to this role that I had no appetite or interest in local government reorganisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Sue.
Yes, sorry, if I can just come back to Councillor du Preez's point about the discrepancy between the terminology. I apologise for that. We'd need to realign that. It would be one or the other, not both, and we would address which one it is.
Okay. I don't see any more.
Just to have clarity, maybe I've misread it. I don't know. I missed it. Where does it actually say that this is a pilot? Read by Cosmic in the paper. Did I miss something? Somebody can point me to where it refers to.
Sue?
This paper doesn't make reference to the Cosmic report. It's driven by the outcome, but we don't make reference to. Sorry.
So it need not be a pilot if it happens, it happens. And as you've already said, Vice Chair, you know, if that's what Cambridge City want to do and want to meet with their colleagues in the city, I have no objections to it. But as Councillor Goldsack already said, not too happy about 1.9. That's worded, so I can't support it.
Okay. I can't see any more hands up, so we'll go to the recommendations. Again, can I take them in block? Everyone happy with that? Okay, so those in favour of the recommendations, please can I have a show of hands? 5. Yep. Okay, those against? Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Councillor Blair. Okay, we go on to item 6 in response to the full council motion on violence and intimidation against members. The Director, Legal and Governance will introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is in pursuance of a motion tabled by Councillor Bulat, who is still in the room, fortunately, in relation to violence and intimidation against members. In terms of the motion, that's on the front of the paper, and what this committee was to do were to look at an action plan that has been developed in conjunction with the member who proposed the motion, and to review it, discuss it, and add anything in which they felt was appropriate. So it's fairly straightforward, I think.
Thank you. Is there any debate? Okay. I've got councillor Godsack.
A very quick one to say that I seconded the motion. So I think that's a you know, a positive endorsement of the position you find yourself in.
Councillor Prey? Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, a couple of things. Firstly, I'm really pleased to see this piece of work moving on because I think it is very important and very timely. And I get the sense that intimidation against councillors has increased markedly in recent years. I would say particularly the last couple of years in Cambridgeshire. A couple of things I wanted to say. The first thing was that was the action about removing home addresses from registers of interest. While that is welcomed, the internet never forgets. And I think that there are quite a number of members who are now caught in that, of having released their home address information years ago and rather wishing they hadn't. My home address information is still online, and I put it on the ballot paper last month. And I just feel that's part of being accountable to residents and not being intimidated into being secluded and shut off in a way I don't want to be. But I appreciate that I'm fortunate that I feel I can do that, and many members do not. But there is a real issue, I think, with the internet remembering, and while this is a good step, it's not going to solve that for many people. I was quite horrified actually a few days before the debate on the debates at I think it was the March council meeting. One of the social media websites was circulating lists of members' names and addresses and saying, if you feel angry about the way these people voted on this, that, the other, why don't you go and visit them at their home address and tell them how you feel? And I think inciting people to go and visit their local representatives at their home address while in a state of anger is deplorable. You never know who is going to answer the door. People live with families, they live with children, they live with older, vulnerable people. And even if they don't, even if it is them answering the door, they shouldn't expect, as part of their public duty and public service, to be faced with people saying, go and do that to people, doorstep people in that state. I noticed, interestingly, a large increase this year in the numbers of candidates at election who didn't put their home addresses on the ballot paper. They clearly felt intimidated about doing that, many of them, if not most of them. And I think that is deplorable and says something very, very bad about the state of our national and indeed local politics. So I wanted to make that point very strongly. The second thing I wanted to say, of two, you'll be relieved to hear, is that there's an action there about providing appropriate security measures at council meetings, and I agree with that too. I think that's important. But the thing that isn't mentioned at all in this paper, and is in fact, it seems to me, the greatest risk for many elected representatives, is not meetings, is not even their home address, it's surgeries. David Amos in Southend was killed at his surgery, constituency surgery. Jo Cox, who was killed in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum, was killed on her way to or from her surgery. Going back many years further back, during the coalition period 2010 to 2015, emblazoned on my memory, the MP for Cheltenham, Nigel Jones, was severely injured by a man coming to his surgery with a samurai sword, in which Nigel Jones' assistant, Councillor Andrew Pennington, was killed. Surgeries are a huge risk. They are not mentioned in this report, and I appreciate that they are voluntary activities. We're not forced to do them. I have done them. I continue to do them. I do them in 3 locations, one of which is at an existing get-together, so there's quite a lot of people there anyway, at the Book Cafe in Little Downham. One of them is in a room in the local school in one of the villages where I have a colleague with me. But as the Nigel Jones, Andrew Pennington case shows, just having someone with you is no real protection. And the third one, I thought long and hard about, and I sit on my own in a village room, which you can't see through the windows because they're too high. And I'm advertising to thousands of people when and where I will be sitting there in that unoverlooked premises in the early evening. Now, I did something which I wouldn't want to glorify with the title of a risk assessment, but you consider these things. Is that a safe thing for me to do? And I did that for several years. And I have to admit that after the intimidation of certain people, not me, but certain people in the run up to and aftermath of that March meeting of this council, I decided not to do my March and April surgeries because I felt that the balance of risk had tipped. Fortunately, I now have a colleague as a result of the May elections that I can say, come along, we'll do this together. But again, two people are no particular protection, and we are two women of a certain age. I'm not 6'4" and black belt in karate or something, even if that would be much use, which it isn't against a being samurai sword. So I think there's a whole issue about protecting councillors who are trying to go out into communities and do stuff and engage with their residents. You can't be 100% protected all the time, but we need advice, I think, on that, and we need to and members need to learn and know how to consider those risks and what to do to mitigate them, because I don't want to be so intimidated by certain people that I stop doing the job properly that I believe that I was elected to do. So I would like to see some consideration given somewhere in this piece of work to the biggest area of risk, which is councillor surgeries. Thank you.
Misha?
It's kind of linked to that and also to the table on 2.2. We have arranged personal safety training for members. We held our first session on the 16th of June, run by an ex-police officer. 9 people attended, and apparently they had quite a good time because he does practical safety training as well. We've got another session on the 27th of July, and I would encourage all groups to encourage their members to take part in that if possible, or if they need to. And the other point I wanted to raise was regards the employment assistance programme. HR have been in contact with me, and we are running 2 sessions on the 25th of July, one at lunchtime and one at 5 o'clock, so that members can find out what help and assistance is available to them.
Councillor Kingsley.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things. I referred earlier in our previous discussion to behaviours within the chamber, and I think that matters. I was concerned that it wasn't addressed directly in the report that we considered. It may well be yet to come, but people look to us for leadership. And if they see us behaving badly, that gives them, they feel licensed to behave badly themselves. So that's the first point I want to make. The second is the date on the sheet that you referred to, Michelle, paragraph 2.2, the 30th of September is a Saturday. So I wondered if this was by which it had to be done. Okay, fine, lovely. The third point, which I think is something that we may want to consider for the future, is it's great to have a presentation from the police on dealing with harassment and abuse. I'm looking forward to being on the same training session as Councillor Dupre, because I understand there are karate moves involved. And but one of the things that I would like to see is a seminar or some training from a social media expert on. It's included. Okay, perfect. Because I can tell you that the combination of Facebook and potholes is toxic.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Well, I just wanted to commend the course which was held on Friday. Alex and I were there. Fortunately, it was running a bit late, so I missed the, I think you called it exciting physical bit. I'm not sure whether that's what I was anticipating, but it was very good, and it certainly covered campaigning and going out and about, meeting members of the public. I don't recall it specifically talking about surgeries, but all those issues were related and together. The only aspect which I felt wasn't adequately covered was some of the written stuff where, as the chief executive will know, we get quite a lot of written complaints, people going on, and it's similar to stuff put on Facebook, social media, which can be extremely wearing, and it would be interesting to know how to deal with those rather than dealing with harassment and abuse in public life. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just wanted to comment on the incidents that Councillor Dupre rightly highlighted in terms of the March Council, where we had individual elected members within the County Council whose names and addresses were published on social media with some unfortunate, inflammatory and inciting behaviour to encourage people to attend their home addresses. I think it's incumbent on me to say that I personally reported that matter to the police on behalf of all the members concerned and encouraged the members to report it as well on an individual basis. I have to say, I think part of the issue, and again, I absolutely agree with Councillor Dupre on this point, part of the issue is that I don't believe that the police service, and this is not a criticism of Cambridgeshire Constabulary, it's a national issue, the police service has neither the resources or the inclination at present to really deal with these types of incidents to the extent that perhaps you as elected members need and deserve. And dare I say, some of your senior officers may also need and deserve. Because to Councillor Wilson's point, yes, we do have some very persistent and vexatious complainers, none of whom go away, and some of whom have been working with the County Council, in the nicest way of describing it, for decades in some cases, and some of them will literally never go away. We manage that as best we can. We do what we can through our customer complaints policy. And in some cases, we implement single point of contact arrangements and arrangements for dealing with vexatious people. I am afraid we will just have to continue to deal with some of those, even although on a day-to-day basis, they are denigrating, insulting, rude, slanderous, defamatory, and probably saying some serious untruths in respect of the conduct of both members and officers of the authority. I am afraid that is partly the price we all pay for being in public life in different shapes and forms. And then finally, Chair, I just wanted to make reference to Councillor Kindersley's comments around behaviour, rather appropriate given we're at Constitution and Ethics Committee. The monitoring officer and I were having a conversation earlier around corporate governance and all things Thurrock and other such reports. Dare I say, Chair, as Chief Executive, I think the dilution of the standards regime for elected members in England has not contributed to enhancing public debate, but that is a personal view. The final point, Chair, I wanted to make, because I've seen this in other authorities, Councillor Dupre is absolutely right. The risk that members take in terms of surgeries is something that training can help with, but we do need to support you with the risk assessment approach that requires, and just being alert to safe escape routes and safe entry routes to such properties. So there is work we can and should do. Michelle's right, training is a starting point. I think there is more we can do in that space particularly. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. I totally endorse this, but I'd like to add a couple of things, if I may. And one is that this should be a, not every meeting, but a regularly reviewed living document that should come back and be reviewed at this meeting, because slightly negatively, but it's a good start. I'm picking up from Councillor Kindersley's point. I don't think it's gone far enough on in-house member actions and how members behave to each other, etc., etc. And I also don't think this, although there's some future training needs, I think we all need a better understanding of the noise of social media platforms and the impact that that can have on us. Not necessarily the content, just the general noise of it. And as I've said before, the noise will always outwin fact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any more hands up. So the recommendations, are people happy with the recommendations? Okay, is that unanimous? Yep, lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, we now go on to item 7, a review of the complaints received under the Members' Code of Conduct. June 2023. The Director, Legal and Governance will introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is the Members' Committee's regular report in terms of Code of Conduct issues. There have been a number of complaints resolved since the last time we've met, and those are included at 2.2. There are a couple outstanding, and next time I report to you, we've had quite a considerable number over one particular issue, which I'll be reporting to you as well. But they didn't make the cut on this report because of timing. As members can see, we're trying to get the throughput of the complaints done more quickly. So there's less time in between a complaint coming in and finding being issued. We've also changed our process. So instead of a more informal email exchange, which can take up a great deal of time and actually doesn't give the complainant what they want, which is usually not what we can give them, is that we're issuing decision notices now. So the member of the public has to formally make a complaint on our form rather than just email in a line saying a member has done X, Y, and Z. And I think that's helping because the informal process in terms of resolution wasn't working. It was just elongating the process. As members can see, they're the usual suspects in terms of the items that are being brought forward. Sometimes members' language during meetings is picked up, but quite often it doesn't breach the code. And that's really where the complaints are coming in, certainly from members of the public at the moment. So I'm happy to answer any questions that obviously doesn't breach any of the data protection implications of the paper as far as I can. But we will, as I said at the last meeting, we will be coming back with some trend analysis on this for members so they can see how complaints are being dealt with, how fast they're being dealt with, what kind of areas they're about and who they're coming from as well. I think that will be useful for members moving forward.
Turn the mic on, sorry about that. Is everybody okay? No debate? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So item 8 is the committee agenda plan, the Democratic Services Assistant to introduce this item.
So it's there. Yeah, if you've got any questions.
Stephen.
Chair, just mindful of your debate earlier on the item following Councillor Beulah and Councillor Goldsack's motion at full council on violence and intimidation against members, it would seem appropriate to add that item again to the forward plan for this committee so you can have a progress report. I would suggest that that's done in consultation with the Director of Legal and Governance, but I would have thought further report by the end of this calendar year would be sensible. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, agree with that. Everyone agree?
Agreed.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I declare this meeting closed.
Well done, Jerry.